repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Just as it is appointed for a man to die once, and after that comes judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly awaiting him. Now, here's what I want you to appreciate about the contrasts between Jesus as a Melchizedekian high priest and Aaron and the sacrifices he offered as a Levitical high priest. First, note that the high priest under the Old Covenant would enter the holy place year by year with blood not his own. Aaron would offer a blood sacrifice. And so that's the first point. And the second point is that the sacrifice was offered repeatedly year after year, implying that it was only limited and temporary in its offering. The sacrifices were offered annually. But contrary to that, in the New Covenant order, notice that Jesus is himself both the priest who sacrifices and the sacrifice who is given. That's the fundamental difference between the Levitical and the Melchizedekian high priesthood. The priest and the sacrifice are distinguishable from one another in the Old Covenant Levitical order. The priest is the sacrifice in the Melchizedekian order. Now, I just want you to think with me, what kind of order was Moses operating in? He was clearly at the time of the Levitical order, but he was offering no animal sacrifice. He was offering himself. As such, Moses was a type of Christ as a priest who gives himself. Now, what I want you to appreciate here is that in Hebrews 9:23 through 24, the author of Hebrews makes a point that I want you to appreciate. The copies of heavenly things were purified with the rites under the Levitical order, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. Verse 24, for Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. So, what is the distinction? The distinction is in the Old Covenant order, you have copies of heaven. In the New Covenant order, you have heaven itself. And Aaron is associated with the copies of the heavenly things. Jesus, as the high priest, has entered into heaven itself. Now, if you look, that's Hebrews 9:24. If you look at Hebrews 8:6, like we did earlier, what does this go on to say? It goes on to say that Jesus, when he entered into heaven, did not enter into the earthly places. Hebrews 8:6 says, which the tabernacle is a copy and a shadow of the things in the heavens. Jesus himself enters into heaven itself as a high priest to make intercession for us. And the copy in the earthly tabernacle, the shadow of the earthly tabernacle, is precisely the thing that he has left behind. Jesus has entered into heaven itself. And what is heaven? Heaven is likened to a tabernacle dwelling of God. And so, Hebrews 9:24 and Hebrews 8:6 present heaven as a tabernacle into which Christ has entered. And what text does that remind us of from our lecture last night? Nehemiah 9:6, Isaiah 6, 1 through 3, Isaiah 66:1, Psalm 11:4. Jesus has entered into heaven, which is likened to a tabernacle, 8:6, 9:24. Now, that was probably way too fast. I shouldn't do it. I went way too fast. But here's what I want you to appreciate. The presentation of Jesus rising up into heaven is also presented, if you'll look at Hebrews 12, and this is what I want to spend just our last 30 or 45 minutes on, Hebrews 12, verses 18 through 24. I'd like you to look at that with me. Hebrews 12, 18 through 34. And listen to what the author of Hebrews is telling us. Hebrews 12, 18 through 21, and then 22 through 24 reads as follows. You have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given, if even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But verse 22 through 24, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Now, the first thing that you have to appreciate is that Hebrews 12, 18 through 21 sets a fundamental contrast between, I'm going to draw just a little mountain here, earthly, looks like, I don't know, that's a mountain, you know, earthly Mount Sinai and heavenly Mount Zion. If I had a larger board, we would have this earthly mountain down below and the heavenly mountain up above. So if we were to just put this in kind of a Windows 7 side box here, this now, Hebrews 11, 22 through 24, brings into view not simply heaven as temple, not simply heaven as throne room, or heaven as tabernacle, but heaven as a mountain dwelling of God that is the original after which the earthly mountain of Eden was patterned, and after which earthly Mount Sinai was patterned. And if you notice in 12:18, you have not come to what may be touched. So as you come particularly to worship in union with the ascended Christ, the author of Hebrews says, you have not come to what may be touched, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, a heavenly Jerusalem. And what characterizes this? Well, I'll tell you how I think the author of Hebrews is introducing this. He's going to introduce it by starting at the base of the mountain. You have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem, to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn. Now first, here's what I want you to appreciate. Now I'm going to slow down. I'm going to try to give you 40 minutes of what we can. First, there is a still frame picture of Mount Zion presented in Hebrews 12, 22 through 24. The city of the living God. That first description is the exterior description of heavenly Jerusalem. It's a presently real, created dwelling place of God, understood as a city. And so if you do a panoramic survey of this heavenly reality, it looks like a city. Hebrews 11:16. The city was the future hope for Abraham. Hebrews 13:14. The city is not here, it is a city to come. Then, after you move into the city of the living God, into the city of this God who is in his heavenly temple, you start to move upward to the place where Christ is seated. And you move to that which is, according to verse 22, innumerable angels in festal gathering. So as you ascend this mountain, there are angels in festal gathering. And those angels in festal gathering are precisely what we saw in Revelation 4, 8 and following, and in Isaiah 6, 1 through 3. The seraphim surrounding the throne presence of God, crying out in worship, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." That is the lowest portion of this mountain. Then you move higher than the angels to the assembly of the firstborn enrolled in heaven, to God the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, who is the mediator of this new covenant. Christ, who is seated at the right hand of the glory of the majesty on high, is pictured here as seated upon a mountain, surrounded by angels and surrounded by the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and he is the mediator of a new covenant that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Christ, verse 24, is the one who is now enthroned in heavenly glory. And so as such, you can say that the church now, by faith in Christ, has come to Mount Zion. Verse 22, you have come to Zion, signals what? It signals an actual ascending of the mountain of God in union with the ascended Christ. And by faith union with Christ, you have come to the heavenly mountain. And this is so because by the Spirit and through Spirit-worked faith, you are united to the one who is seated at the right hand of God. Now, it's just in light of that we start to see now that Hebrews 12, 18 through 24, Hebrews 12, 22 through 24, presents the church now ascending the mountain that Jesus Christ himself has ascended and where he now sits at the right hand of God. And I want you to think about it. I've gone far too fast because I think I've cut a little bit too much out here. And I want to talk to you finally, if I can, also about Sabbath rest, which, given the way I've presented it, I don't know if I'm going to have time. But what Hebrews 12 and Hebrews 9, 23 and 24 are focusing our attention on is this: that the temporary earthly temple of Eden, the temporary tabernacle under Moses, the temple that was atop earthly Mount Zion, which we could look at if we had more time, those have given way to a place where Christ has ascended and where he now sits atop a heavenly mountain dwelling place where the glory of God is made known to angels and saints alike. And the point for what we've been looking at in our presentation here is that this is the realization of the covenant that was typified under Moses, where Moses himself entered temporarily up onto the top of an earthly mountain. Christ has now entered into heaven itself. And if I can, in the time that I have right now, let me see if I can bring it to conclusion. I've made a bit of a mistake. I've got 30 pages of notes, and I had 40 minutes to give it to you. So let me see if I can regather myself pedagogically and give you this presentation in a kind of synoptic form. The author of Hebrews, in Hebrews 9, 22 and 23, tells us that after Jesus made purification for sin, he entered not into the copies of the heavenly things, but Hebrews 9:24, he entered into heaven itself. Now, if you'll look at Hebrews 8, I think this is the best way for me to try to bring some clarity for you. The point of the book of Hebrews is this: we have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister in the holy places in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. Pause. When Jesus Christ finished his work on earth, he ascended up into a tabernacle throne dwelling atop Mount Zion, where he serves the church. What is the service that he performs for the church while he is in heaven? He intercedes. Now, I'm just going to do my lecture off the top of my head and just try to give it to you in the broadest of broad strokes. Where is the church for whom he intercedes in heaven? The church is on earth in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, the church faces opposition and hardship, just like the generation coming out of Egypt, passing through the waters of the Red Sea and wandering in the wilderness. Hebrews 3, 7 through 4:11 tells us that we are a wilderness church. And in the wilderness, what do we need? Unlike Moses, who interceded for only one event in Israel's history, the sin of the golden calf, we need a high priest who ever lives to intercede for us as we are in the wilderness. So when we come to Jesus Christ in the wilderness, where have we come? We have come to one who is seated at the right hand of the majesty in heaven, who has ascended atop Mount Zion, and who is ministering in heavenly places for this fundamental reason. He intercedes in heaven until such time that he brings you to rest and glory, to see him seated on his throne, interceding in his glory, and confers upon you Sabbath rest. So from the standpoint of Hebrews 3, 7 through 4:11, Jesus Christ serves in heaven atop Mount Zion in the holy places made without hands, as he is bringing a wilderness people to himself in those heavenly places. And Hebrews 9, pardon me, I've jumped all over the place because I just came off my notes. I'm not happy with this final material here, but the sermon on Sunday will give you a coherent presentation of the whole thing. So, sorry. But in terms of Hebrews, the theology of Hebrews, Jesus will return a second time, and he will bring many sons to glory, and he will bring his church to rest. And that rest and that glory is a bringing a people to heavenly Mount Zion, where rest is conferred upon them and their bodies are brought into the most holy place in heaven. And so, from the standpoint of the book of Hebrews, you can say that Jesus' high priestly ministry in heaven is a ministry that exists in order to serve a wilderness people who have not yet been brought into the resting place of God in heaven. And the argument from Hebrews 4, 9 through 10 is that just as God has rested from his creational works, so the church will rest from her wilderness works. And those wilderness works will give way to a rest in heaven. I am tempted, if you will give me this opportunity, I'm tempted to pause and see if I can't give you one 30-minute lecture that brings this to a more coherent conclusion. Would you give me that opportunity? Okay. I went too fast. In fact, here's the deal. Give me about 5 minutes, and let me see if I can re-prepare something that gives this a little bit more coherence for a closer. I jumped all over the place, and I'm not serving you well. Sound good? Okay. Just take about a 5-minute break, and I'm going to see what I can put together.